I have chose Justified and Ancient as the story for my analysis, and here are some of my focus points for my analysis. It will focus on the main character Lee, the cultural clash, and the global voices. And Justified and Ancient is a British story, a short story about cultural clashes and trying to be something you aren't. Text talks about some of the different rights that people have from East and West. The story also talks about the borders which have separated East and West, and this has caused distrust between people. The text relates to the overall theme of global voices. The main character of the story is Lee. Lee is a common British white guy who is having a guided tour around a little village in the mountains of India. It is a poor village with a cluster of wooden huts. But it seems that the villagers are proud of living there, which is very strange for Lee. His guide Punji makes a big deal about the village being very old and sacred, but Lee doesn't seem to care, which is indicated by this quote that Lee wasn't really listening to Punji. Together with Punji, he meets with the chief of the town, from whom he buys a big amount of marijuana. Lee wants to leave the village quickly and go back to Delhi after he has got what he came for, which was the cheap marijuana, so he can sell that for more when he returns to Britain. Lee prefers the modern city rather than the country, and he cannot wait to go back to Delhi, to sleep on a real mattress, to watch some televisions and go to cafes and be around other tourists with the same language and values and opinions as himself. Lee generalizes the villagers and finds them less intelligent than people from the West, which is where he is from. He believes that they are ignorant for living like they do, with no water, electricity and televisions and access to the internet and so on. Still, he does not want to make the villagers and their chief know that he has put that kind of stamp on them. He wants the chief to like him so that he can sell him the marijuana for cheaper. He pretends that he is interested in the stories that the villagers tell him, but at the same time he's making fun of the villagers, and these stories doesn't really seem to matter to him. After meeting the chief, Lee gives biscuits to some of the children from the village because he found the biscuits revolting himself. At first he feels like the most generous person in the world, but when the children ask him for money instead, he feels like they are revolting and do not want them to touch him. His kindness is not that sincere, and he just wants to get away. As the reader of the story, you don't get a very positive look on Lee's personality or appearance. An old woman from the village describes him as amusing to look at, with clumsy steps and chubby body, which is indicated by this quote from the story. She thinks that he is a typical man from the West, just as Lee believes that she is and the other villagers are typical people from the East, like primitive and not as wise as himself. He has typical pink skin color and turns red from the sun. Throughout the whole story, Lee is not listening to a thing Punji is telling him about the village's values and the sacred temple. He does not seem very interested in knowing something about different cultures, and he does not give much weight to the nature or habitats of this village. The short story points are how values are different around the world. The story and the characters, especially Lee, makes this message even clearer. Lee is a symbol of the typical Western man who does not care about the environment, who has little compassion for others, and who is very materialistic. The Eastern people are described as honest, primitive, and good people who love their little village and simple life in the mountains. They earn their living from tourism, who come to see their place and do not need big expensive things to be happy. Overall, the difference in the two cultures are very clear in the short story. At last, I will look closer on how the story relates to the overall theme of global voices. The story relates to the overall theme of global voices because the story sheds light on some of the cultural differences there are in the world, and this is done by showing the contrast between the Western and Eastern people through Lee and the villagers. And that was my analysis of the short story, Justified and Ancient.